Good evening and welcome again to the Eclectic Radical. It's good to be getting back into the habit of doing a show every week again. As always, I'm the Eclectic Radical, Chris Richards. Uh, Tonight I have a panel, and we're going to be talking about the movement for a People's Party and some of the recent drama and their experiences and their thoughts, both about their experiences and the drama. And we're also going to try to talk a little bit about the tendency in the spaces that people call left to make a big deal about complaining about wokeness, which seems counterintuitive to me. But I think that's something that works perfect with the rest of this. And on that note, Renee, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good evening. I'm Renee Johnston. I'm in New Jersey now. I used to be in New York for a long time, actually. And I'm really excited, actually, to talk to you all. Scott, it's nice to meet you.
Good to meet you too.
I just met you today, so thank you. Sure. But Chris, we've been going back and forth forever. So to have FaceTime is fantastic. So I appreciate the time. I got involved in MPP after their 2020 convention. Was very excited, very fired up about what they were talking about. So to see this shift happen, it's quite the shift. So thank you.
All right, and my name's Scott Gruber. I'm in Northern Virginia. And I joined the People's Party around the same time as Renee, right after the big People's Convention in the fall of 2020. I started out in the Creative Arts Working Group. I was doing I headed up the music circle. I was doing a lot of the music for some of the videos that they were putting out on like TikTok and whatnot. And then over the summer of this past year, I got involved in the Virginia Party. I started out just as a volunteer there, became the state coordinator, and then was elected in October to the state chair, and then recently resigned amidst some of the drama, or actually just before the drama got really dramatic. So.
I remember hearing a little bit about some drama already, though, related to that resignation. I remember something about everybody in your chapter's leadership resigning at the same time or something like that.
And that was not planned. We can, I wrote to the people that I was working with in Virginia. We had a really good group of volunteers, really dedicated. We were all, really interested in focusing on local issues here in Virginia. And, we were going to, we went to a big protest in Richmond against the Mountain Valley Pipeline. That was like our first our meetup, like physically in person. And, we were really having a good time working together and building the state party and getting ready to actually run candidates. And then, the national party was just kept doing this shift to the right. And, it kind of came to a head when Nick started talking about how, he really wanted to support the trucker convoy.
Before we get into all of that, can I introduce myself and explain how I was welcome?
Yes, go ahead, please, Alex.
Sure. So some people might be seeing me and confused and like, what does he got to do with MPP? Because I've already been on Chris's show a couple of times and we didn't touch on MPP. But when I found out he was going to have former MPPers on, I really wanted to come on because I had issues with my involvement in MPP before all of this. And it is related, and we'll get into that. But first off, my name's Alex Suarez. I'm a journalist and historian, a writer, currently out of North Florida. And I've talked with Chris on an array of issues, but it's important to go over this issue as well. And I first got involved with MPP shortly after it was renamed MPP. Originally, it was Draft Bernie. This was back in late 2017. I was one of the first two regional campus leads in South Florida. It was Michelangelo Hamilton and myself. This was back when I was going to Miami-Dade College. And I also was in charge of negotiations with the Spaniards who were going to train us in coalition building. That was Jonathan, Lancelot, and myself. Used my connections in Spain, and Lancelot was not familiar with Spanish, and so I helped in those negotiations. Briefly, shortly before the Spaniards were due to arrive in Washington to help us in this training, things went downhill, and subsequently the interview that Nick Brana did with me was taken down. I was censored within the MPP. A lot of people, including Lancelot, were upset by that. We hope to have Lancelot on the show eventually. And they left. And all of that transpired and showed a lack of leadership literally years before the convention and years before these people were involved. But then they experienced similar things with Nick, and that's interesting. So looking forward to hearing more from them on it.
Yeah, and it's really one of the things that I will admit kept me from ever getting too involved, despite being generally supportive of all third-party efforts, is that, somebody said to me, Nick's been around since 2016 and he's still doing this. And they haven't moved ahead at all. And I just sort of quietly filed that away. And things looked busy and it looked like things might change. And I was still really skeptical until Paula Jean came aboard. Paula Jean Swearingen, for those of you not familiar with the People's Party, she ran a couple of times for Senate in West Virginia in Democratic primaries, won the Democratic primary in 2020, and was thrown under the bus by the West Virginia Democratic Party because Joe Manchin basically quietly said, no, we want the Republican to win, so I stay powerful. Because, just imagine if there was another Democrat in West Virginia, how much less power Joe Manchin would actually have. But so that was when Paula Jean came aboard. That was when I thought, okay, wow, this might actually be serious this time, because she's someone who's actually going to do work. And of course, that's when it eventually had to blow up in order to stop from being serious, if I understand Nick's pattern right.
And I've been an independent or third-party guy for most of my life, and the concept of MPP I still support, and I'm sure the other two comrades here agree. It is a wonderful idea to start a new party altogether, especially a party that will be more representative of the working class, which has been largely abandoned in this country the past few years. The issues with the leadership and the issues with the lack of transparency and the cult around Nick that I already saw characteristics of back in 2017. And then, of course, you all witnessed later on. So that's really our issue here, right? People are already on Twitter saying we're MPP bashers or whatever. That's not what it's about. We're not trying to say go vote Democrat, right? We're saying that the issues with the leadership and how things were handled, right?
Yeah, let's go ahead and make this really clear right now, because when I hear people say this, it really makes me angry. And that is that anybody actually involved with trying to build a serious alternative is going to be there because they actually are tired of the Democrats and want nothing to do with them. So when I hear people talk about Democratic Party infiltrators, it makes my eyebrows go up just a little bit.
And, I keep saying over and over, if I'm a Dem infiltrator, I'm like the worst one on earth, because I do nothing all day but crap on all politicians, because I think they all suck.
I told people what Biden was going to do. The only thing that I really got wrong is I thought he would be a little better on COVID, and that's been just worse than everybody's expectations, I think.
I thought he was going to ease the embargo, not on Venezuela, but at least on Cuba, because he was part of that with Obama. So I had low expectations of him, and then he went even lower, continuing the terrible sanctions, continuing Trump's policy and worsening them in foreign policy in many ways. Look, we are today now with Ukraine. I don't know if the two guests are familiar, but with my activism recently in Venezuela, my anti-imperialist activism resulted in me going to Venezuela last year for the first time as a regional election observer. And the foreign policy which Chris touches on a lot, and I appreciate that. Chris is very well versed in foreign policy and history. It's largely ignored by progressives. Like if you're in progressive, doesn't matter if you're in the squad. To me, if you're a progressive or a socialist thinker, you have to be anti-imperialist, right? So the two parties are imperialist parties, right? I mean, nobody can negate that, and that's why we desperately need an alternative, not just to represent the working class at home, but to go against the imperial or corporate interests of the U.S. state and what it's been doing to other nations, especially in the global South or the third world.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Yeah, I think that was something that that attracted me. I think I was a Bernie supporter in 2016 and then 2020, and I was still sort of following the Democrats through the Trump administration. I thought there was some promise with some of the more progressive members, but then they have become a disappointment in the last year. I joined out of absolute frustration with the Democrats. I've voted for third parties in the past a few times, but we have a Green Party candidate who frequently runs for the county board here in Arlington, so I voted for her a number of times. But it was my first time, like, really. I've never really done political organizing. I've never been a political organizer.
Are you in Virginia, Scott?
I'm in Virginia, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I know Arlington.
Yeah.
I lived there when I was a kid. But
Yeah.
it's good to know that the Greens are active there. I know they've been active in Maryland. I'm sure you heard of Kevin Zeese. I knew him for more than 10 years. Unfortunately, he passed away about a year ago, but he was very active with the Venezuelan efforts and with the Green Party. And I was involved with the Greens for a while and voted for Jill Stein twice. So that was what I found also attractive about the MPP, because they took a lot of ideas from the Greens. And it was something new because the Greens couldn't gain a lot of traction. So again, I think it's a great concept. And people are telling me like, oh, if this is true about Nick, then we're going to have to vote Democrats. Like, no, that's not what this is about, right? I mean, if they have more transparent leadership, more revolutionary and principled leadership, then we can go ahead with those same ideas of the MPP.
So I have to interrupt there, and then we're going to go to Scott so we can talk about everybody in Virginia quitting and get
Yeah, I want to hear about that.
And then we want to swing to Renee and talk some about her experience too. But I do want to. I hate it when that happens to my brain. What were we just talking about?
It'll come to you.
The leadership.
That's right.
Leadership.
Yes. So that actually isn't possible if I understand the way the structure that Nick has put in place works. Nobody can run the People's Party. Well, no, not even the People's Party. No one can run the movement for a People's Party. And no People's Party can exist unless Nick changes the legal structure of the organization as it currently exists.
I did not know that.
Well,
Right.
yeah, I mean,
So
I can go into that a little bit.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Do you want to explain? I don't.
Well, so they were in the process of this NOC National Organizing Committee process to change the structure, and they had they were drawing up bylaws for the organization that's going to become the party. And I think they are still in that process, but in the process of doing that, they also purged a lot of the people who had differences of opinion with Nick on some points of the bylaws. So they take a few steps forward and then major steps back. So it feels like they never really, they're always getting a little closer, but then not getting there. From what I saw in the leadership, it was, Nick was part of it, but I think there was just a lack of focus on core services, a lack of focus on, how to run the day-to-day organization. How do you onboard new volunteers? How do you get accounts set up on, the social media platforms, or how do you get, access to the shared drives? All these things were they didn't have procedures to do a lot of things. And I think when Zainab Day came in, she was helping with some of that. And she, to her credit, she and Sabrina, who came in, they helped to put a lot of that structure in place. They did a lot of good work in starting that, but it seemed like that, there was just always a lot of works in progress that were coming, but for some reason just never came to fruition. And
well, in addition, the real issue, so the whole thing is under an umbrella corporation called People for a Working Democracy, which is, it started as a 501c4, then it changed to a 527. And the real issue is that Nick's signature and Nick's address is on every document for all of those organizations. So when you talk about change in leadership and even what Scott described with the NOC, in the end, Nick is always there, kind of turning the needle to whichever direction he wants it to go in. So even when you look at, the NOC vote, what people are now starting to discover, and what I kind of knew on the back end, peeking at what was happening, was all of that, what should have been like an actual election and an actual opportunity to bring in a leader that people believed in and wanted to be there, it was all being pushed towards making Nick the chair for the NOC. So even like their attempt at being like democratic and having a vote and having an election, it wasn't real, and when you hear Nick talk about it, he talks about how he was, the overwhelming choice. And I've never heard a bigger crock of shit, because let's be real, if you send a ballot to 100 and something thousand people and you get 900 votes back and 600 of those votes are for Nick, that is not an overwhelming majority, right? That's whatever amount of people chose to open their email, plus the few people who decided to actually be engaged.
That's a danger sign. That's a Democratic overwhelming majority. When the Democratic Party talks about how they represent the vast majority of the voters, of the voters, you're not representing the half the population that doesn't vote.
And the superdelegates, right? Like, oh, look how progressive we are that we got rid of a bunch of superdelegates. Well, the Republicans are left of you. They abolished them years ago.
Something I want to say about that too, that's kind of interesting, that I didn't really realize until after I left, that there was this huge mailing list, and I only could see the Virginia portion of it, which was about 2,500 people. But what was interesting, like once I became coordinator, I started sending out like blast emails to everyone on the Virginia list, a few days before we were going to have our bi-weekly meetings, to try and get more people. I was trying to get people from the list and get them onboarded. And and like we were sending like a monthly newsletter, like here's the progress updates, here's what we're doing, here's how we're taking steps toward ballot access and whatnot. And we were starting to get some engagement, but I would always get like a handful of emails back from people saying, why are you trying to start a third party? This is ridiculous. You're going to hurt the Democrats. Third parties never work. And I'd always wondered to myself, why would you sign up for a third-party mailing list if you don't believe in third parties? And we even had a few people who showed up at meetings, and they were like, yeah, I got an email out of the blue out of this. I don't remember signing up for it, but I thought I'd come check it out. It sounded interesting. So I kind of realized after that, I don't know if all the people who were on that mailing list actually signed up for the mailing lists. I think they might have been imported from something else that didn't know it.
Well, they purchased the list.
That
would have been a Democratic list.
I had a question. You two would know better than me on this, because I've been involved with MPP for a while. Well, this is a backstory, but I'm sure you did your research on Nick before joining. I heard that he had a position in the Bernie campaign that was very, very low level. And from the beginning, he embellished what it was, right? He tried to make it way more than what it actually was, right?
So funny story. Nick always announces that he was like the national coordinator for the Bernie campaign, for the 2016 campaign. If you go to Bernie's actual documents, like his actual campaign documents, it says that he ended the campaign as an unpaid intern, right? So one of the big jokes, honestly, like, and it's kind of mean, but I don't really care anymore. So the big joke is like Nick, intern Nick is what we call him, because he wasn't really like the national coordinator or anything. He was actually an unpaid intern. What I think, and I'll be honest, I don't have any full verification. I only have a few people who were also involved in the Bernie campaign who just simply don't remember Nick being a part of anything major. There was, however, a national director whose name was Nick. It just wasn't Nick Branagh. What I think, like, and I promise you, like, I'm saying it because this is what I think happened. I think it was an error. I think he mistakenly got a check for something that he wasn't actually doing because they confused the Knicks. And no, for real. And because he got the one check, he decided he was just gonna ride with it and say, like, this is what I am for the rest of my life. But there's no evidence. Like, I've talked to like 3 different people who were actually part of Bernie's camp, and none of them recall like Nick being any part of anything major. So
I've heard the intern story before, so I'm inclined to believe it. Scott, let's. I hate to jump around, but let's get back to everybody resigning en masse, because.
Sure. Yeah. So it's I mean, it's kind of a longer story, but yeah, through, I became I started as the Virginia coordinator. They sort of the volunteers elected me as coordinator back in August, and we were just assembling we passed our bylaws. We got our state central committee together, and we were holding elections and all that, and building a really good group in Virginia. But all through that time, there was just this sort of growing fight on the internal Slack, and there was just a lot of it was over like vaccine mandates, and there were a lot of back and forth on that, and like at the start, there would be people who had scientific background, and they'd help combat the misinformation, and I was one of the people who was trying to combat misinformation, and providing links to different articles and scientific studies, and try and but there was always this growing group of people within the party who were like not just anti-vaccine, but like anti-mask, lockdown. There were people who just considered the virus a hoax. There was just this it seemed like this growing group of people who were just like believing everything that they were hearing on like Jimmy Dore and that whole Glenn Greenwald and the whole like group of podcasters that was like turning right at the same time. And then in like November, when the Kyle Rittenhouse trial was going on, and that same group of podcasters was they started saying, oh, look, it's clearly self-defense if you watch the video, and the people, I tried to flag this to people, to the internal Slack in MPP, saying, hey, Jimmy Dore is like coming out in support of Kyle Rittenhouse. He's on our advisory council. That's probably not a good thing, not a good look. And, a few people agreed with me, but like a large number of people just like took issue with it, and they're like, no, they watched the video, it's fine. And
you said he supported the fascist truckers in Canada as well.
That was kind of my last straw when
was he involved with Max Blumenthal on that?
I'm not sure.
So
what I know is he now getting into like February, with the trucker, like Nick had never really said anything in the internal Slack about the party having a position either way. But then all of a sudden in February, out of the blue, he was just like, we have to have a position on this. There was a claim that his father had some kind of side effects from his second dose, and and then they were also this chorus of people. Nick suddenly joined that group of people that was saying, we got to support the convoy. We need to have a position on this. And that was really the last straw for me. I just said, I can't do this. We were trying to organize with like indigenous groups in, Southern Virginia and North Carolina fighting pipelines. And they're posting videos on the national Twitter channel of like the protesters who in New Zealand were like appropriating the Maori haka and saying, oh, look, these aren't white supremacists. Like, how am I supposed to organize with indigenous people in Virginia if they're putting that on the national Twitter. And so that was the last straw. I wrote a letter to the people in Virginia just saying, look, I have to resign. I can't do this anymore. I was getting a lot of harassment in the Slack from, the anti-vaxxers. They, were considering me an infiltrator from Pfizer. And I just said, you know what, I can't, why am I putting in all this time and all this effort to just get insulted? So I resigned, and they all just like one by one said, wow, a lot of them they were just in the state Slack. They weren't in the national group, so they didn't see a lot of what was going on. But when I told them about it, they'd all said, yeah, we're with you. We can't get behind that. We don't support the truckers. And so they all, apart from like two people, one of them was Nick, because he's in Virginia, so he was one of our other committee members who never really showed up for meetings. But yeah, they all just said, yeah, we'll stand in solidarity with you. And I thought that was really touching, and that was really, and we're all still in touch. We're still active and in Virginia politics. So
Chris, did you have a question for him, or can I ask him something real quick?
Go ahead. Ask.
Okay. Are you going to start something new, or what do you think of the idea of starting something new? If because of the bylaws or the structure of MPP, it makes it impossible to have new leadership, are you considering starting something new? Because I did start something in early 2018. It's been inactive, but I did start something back then with former MPPers, which was called Revolutionary Alliance. So have you considered starting an alternative with people that are frustrated with the ongoing issues with MPP, but want to maintain the idea of a new third party, maybe a workers' party or something like that?
So two things. One, I've actually signed on with the Greens here in Virginia. So I haven't been to any of the meetings yet, but I know they've got a fairly active local here in Arlington. And then I'm going to try and help out with the state party. I've also joined the United People's Alliance, which is a similar group of people who were formerly with MPP, a lot of people who were purged. And I think they're trying to continue the work. Some of them are the people who built the state parties for MPP and are trying to build a new party. I think, one of the things that they've mentioned, which I think I'm a real big supporter of, is trying to build coalition with other minor parties. I think that's really the key to success. I think we shouldn't be looking at, all these different left-wing third parties as competitors. I think we should see each other as, as collaborators.
Well, that's what I don't understand. Tell me if I'm wrong, Scott. Why is it that, PSL has to run a presidential candidate, then the Greens and all these other small third parties, why are they each, running a presidential candidate, and they're not all backing one candidate as a coalition?
I got to answer
so much
this.
More sense.
I got to answer this because I know this attitude. I grew up in a church that is traditionally one of the peace churches, which means they're not into fighting or conflict really of any kind. Which means when it gets to the point where church board meetings are just people arguing with each other in hostile ways, eventually a bunch of other people go and start their own church. And that has been going on since before Karl Marx died. You have to remember that the first international was broken up by a big feud between Bakunin and the syndicalists on one side, and Marx and the people who would call themselves Marxists on the other. And it broke up because of that. And then when the Second International formed, they didn't let the anarchists in at all because they thought it would just be too hard to agree to anything. So
didn't Marx say after that, "I'm anything but a Marxist"?
No. That was when his son-in-law published this book. Well, twice. The first time his son-in-law published this very anarchist book called "The Right to be Lazy," which is basically about how most of the greatest inventions in history have been because some bum wanted to work less. And it's actually fairly intelligent and smart, but he's basically talking about how these smart and rich people have been looking for the chance to be lazy. But yeah, and Marx said, well, I'm proud of him because if there's such a thing as a Marxist, this isn't Marxist. But then he said the same thing to the same people a few years later, very angrily, because the French Social Democrats were focusing too much on what he called revolutionary sloganeering and not enough on actually running candidates in French elections. And he said,
Sounds
you
familiar.
call yourself Marxist, but if you're Marxist, I'm not a Marxist.
They were opportunists.
Well, it's beyond that. It's like, if you're going to ignore elections entirely, how are you ever going to organize?
Yeah, and to your question, I think everyone thinks about the presidential campaigns, but like there's so many other campaigns, there's so many other elections, and I think really the place for minor parties is in local elections, state elections. Just here in Virginia, there's 140 state legislature seats. There's we've got like 90 counties and 40 something independent municipalities. Each of those has a county board or a city council. They've got water inspectors, and there's so many seats.
So
what we should do. What I'm just thinking, we shouldn't. Yeah, there's a lot of seats that people.
A lot of state judges are elected, and a lot of county judges are elected.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's anything the Republican Party has shown, is that you do not need an electoral majority if you have a court majority in enough states.
Right.
And you don't need the party's backing to run the judge, right? It's technically NPA, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of these run unopposed every year. There's a lot of people.
There are literally, here in Oregon, they send us a ballot in the mail. It's really nice. But here in Oregon, there are literally judge races where there's only one candidate. And just imagine it would vastly increase the chance of electing a progressive judge if a progressive would run to be judge.
Yeah, exactly. The way I think of it, like, if all these different parties could focus on like one county and each one run for a different seat, don't all compete for the same board seat, but each party run for a different seat on the board, you could take over the county with left-wing parties. It's doable if we work together and support each other.
Richmond, California has a socialist city council and a socialist mayor now, and they've kept it that way for a few years. They haven't taken over the state of California. They haven't abolished capitalism in Richmond yet, but they've changed a lot of policy. On that note, we want to go back in time a little further. Renee, tell us about your experiences with the People's Party. I'm sorry, the movement for a People's Party. We have to be correct.
It's still not a party. So, when I got involved in late 2020, there was really nothing happening in New York, and we kind of just hit the ground running. We started meeting, we started communicating. I was texting people and trying to get people together to just, have like a conversation about what we wanted to do in New York. I got us to where we were, I say I because I'm the only one on the call, but there were a few of us in New York who were pretty active, and we were solidly meeting once a week. We probably had 15 to 20 people on a call most nights. We were trying to, get together how we were going to do things on social media, which it took a while to get access to, how we were going to email people. Nobody had an email. It was very disorganized. And it got to a point where we just started asking, like, what's going on? Like, are we going to get, some direction? Are we going to get some follow-up? Is anybody going to answer the questions? We sat down, we came up with a list of questions that we thought were pertinent regarding like organizing in the state and moving forward with what we wanted to do. We sent them to Filatetto, who was our regional person. he was able to answer like half of them. The other half kind of got pushed off. One of the big questions at the time was, how are we going to manage this ballot access thing? MPP on a whole was discussing, having ballot access across the country. They were going to run for president, all these things. And I lived in New York, which is a state where you have to run for governor or run for president in order to get on the ballot. Governor is obviously the easier one of the two to run for. Cuomo had just changed the rules. So now you needed, I think it was 2% of the voting population of the state in order to, keep your ballot access, which is how the Greens and a few other third parties got kicked off of the New York ballot access at the time. And so, our big question was, okay, well, what are we going to do about running for governor? His seat is up in 2022. It's late 2020. If this is something that we're going to do, we need to start moving on it. We had, we had a connection with, there was someone who was coming to our meetings who knew Zephyr Teach Out. So we were like, could we reach out to her and have a conversation about when she previously ran? We were able to get, and I'm going to blank on his name. He's running for Congress in district in New York 9, and Isaiah Thomas. We were able to get him on a call to talk about what it was like to run in New York and if he would be willing to run on both lines. Would he be willing to say he was part of the People's Party?
Isaiah Bradley
is a Democrat.
No, Isaiah James. I can't.
Isaiah James. Thank
Isaiah
you.
James.
Sorry, Isaiah.
Isaiah Thomas, basketball player.
Right.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's getting late. I'm on the East Coast. It's late here. So, so those were the things that we were talking about because we were pretty adamant. We had a young man who was considering running for a city council seat. We were hoping we were going to be able to support him. So we had all of these things that we were working on and really trying to put together. And we were just kind of at a standstill because no one in National had answers to any questions. They wanted to push off making a decision about running for governor for another 6 months, which to us didn't seem to make much sense. And we just couldn't get anything kind of solidified on the national side as far as what they were going to do to help New York get together, aside from send us $50 if, we paid for things to get copied. And they just didn't have any answers. And so we actually on a group call decided, you know what, we're going to work towards, doing a policy action. So in New York, you can actually form a legal body to just fight some policy thing. And we were like, you know what? Hey, we can fight about ballot access because this new ballot access rule sucks and this doesn't make any sense anyway. And we can actually have a legal organization that is only going to fight about the ballot access. We can do signatures, we can do the whole thing. And literally a week later, I woke up and I didn't have any access anymore because I was an infiltrator. So it just, it's like, I laugh now, but I was really upset when it happened because, I was really deeply involved in all this organizing and, planning the meetings and pulling together agendas and making sure we had people who were accountable for things and, doing the base camp. And I mean, we had started this whole project management thing. We were divvying up, things to do between people who were involved in the weekly meetings. And we were actually getting somewhere. And so to wake up and to realize that I don't have access to anything, there's no explanation, I just can't access anything. I was pissed because I was what is going on? And I emailed Phil and I asked him, I was like, I just woke up, I have no access. You people look like this doesn't look good for you because I was doing all the work. Like, what's wrong with you people? And, I had a week long of meetings and Nick and the phone and the Zooms and all these different things. And they apologized. But to me, if you're capable of doing that to someone once, you're capable of doing it to someone else again and to you again. And I'm just not of the mind that I'm going to be anybody's boo-boo and be chasing you around doing stuff for you to turn around in another 6 to 8 months and call me an infiltrator again. I'm just not doing that.
We know now from recent experience that you are exactly right. Mm-hmm. He can and will do that whenever he pleases.
Absolutely. And to make it worse, after all of this happened, and I was like, I'm not coming back because I'm not stupid. So, thanks anyway. I got another removal letter, like 3 weeks later, telling me that I'd broken community guidelines. And I was like, how did I break community guidelines? I never came back. Like, I was never in the organization. I never joined Slack. What are you people talking about? And, I was mean. I did film. I recorded one of the meetings and I posted it on Twitter, actually, because during that call, when I mentioned, like, how did I get this letter? I didn't have anything to do with the organization. Nick went on this whole thing. Well, that's not what I got from our meeting. And he turns to, we're on the call and he says, Phil, you were on that meeting. Did you get the impression that Renee wasn't coming back? And Phil was like, yeah. It was pretty funny because I was like, hello, like, who does that? Like, after all of that, you still went and did the exact thing that I said I didn't want to be involved in. And I wasn't even involved. Like, and then because I started, I continued to speak and I started to hear from people. So, like Alex, funny enough, I met someone who was even before you, who was part of a steering committee, who all left at one time because it was a disaster and Nick wasn't listening and it was going to be this whole thing. And they all walked out at the same time. So, like,
it sounds like he wants yes men around him. This is classic cult of personality. You can't question the leader. So somebody who's, not fitting his, the way he wants to get things done for whatever reason, he'll go after them. I said I left MPP because I could have stayed and fought and there would have been a vote. But I'll be honest, I got a call from Nick. There was email sent out, rumors sent out, whatever it was. I was the guy that was going to help, with the Spaniards. And I guess there was some people jealous of my involvement. They didn't like how the interview went with Nick or whatever. And so I got a call from him and we talked for like 2 hours and he convinced me to go. And I was willing to fight and put it to a vote. But at that point, I was just completely disappointed with the movement. But yeah, this is just a pattern of behavior with Nick that's been going on for years. And if there's no way to change the leadership with the current structure of MPP, I'm not saying sell out and go join the Democratic Party. I'm saying look at alternatives, right?
Well, I mean, most of the people I know who were looking at MPP are now Greens or Socialist Alternative or something like that. So, I mean, it looks like people are. Aha! You see, there we go.
I just mentioned Kashama Sawant in the YouTube chat. I don't know if anybody has questions for us there, but I'm a big admirer of hers. I saw her speak at the Left Forum a few years ago in New York. I mean, there's an example of somebody who stood up in local politics and has been able to maintain their position there.
And she's phenomenal. And I also registered Green when I moved to New Jersey. And I'm also an active member of Socialist Alternative. We were out in front of Starbucks today, actually. And, it's someone like Kshama Sawant who is really like walking the walk. It gives you like a little sense of hope, right? Like, it gives you just a little bit that you're like, okay, it's possible. Like, there's actually the possibility that there is someone who is a politician but actually behaves like a normal person should behave, because they're representing who they're supposed to represent.
And let's be honest, we don't want politicians who act like politicians. We got plenty of those already. We want working class people. I'm sorry, I'm going to change that because working class leaves too many out. We want proletarians who understand what their role is and what their job is representing the proletariat in Congress. And that means a few things. And whether it's city government, whether it's Congress, whether it's county government, whether it's abolishing the Senate, which we need to do one of these days, but all of that stuff aside, whatever we do, we want people who are going to stay with us and not join the blob in DC. Because let's face it, the Congressional Progressive Caucus is part of the Democratic Party sewer. It's not, they're not really in the end better than the rest of the party. They all bent the knee to Biden. They all abandoned their support as a group individuals did meaningless little shows of opposition, but as a group, they abandoned any sort of resistance to the conservatives in the Democratic Party.
You know what I don't get is Bernie's like, let's get rid of Trump and we'll fight Biden from day one. He still hasn't fought him.
No,
he's in office now. Like,
he's completely submitted to Biden. I love Bernie. There will always be a special place in my heart for Bernie, but Bernie's a Democrat.
And it's so funny after, being told for years, but Bernie's not a real Democrat by the real Democrats. But now he finally is. And
to give them credit, people like Paul Street and Chris Hedges and Bernie's former compatriots in Sunrise have all said Bernie's a Democrat. And those of us who have not listened to them bear a little bit of responsibility for our own disappointment.
And Bernie was even more in league with the Democrats in the 90s, because after the 90s, he kind of was more insurgent as an independent with the Democrats, but he voted along with the crime bill.
Yeah.
He voted for the bombing of Yugoslavia.
Now, to be fair,
yeah.
And I will always say this about the crime bill, even though I'm not a big supporter of this part of it either, because it's still carceralism. It still doesn't solve the actual problem. But Joe Biden loves to brag about the Violence Against Women Act. Joe Biden has made his whole career as a so-called progressive on the Violence Against Women Act. The dirty secret is that they needed Bernie Sanders and Ron Dellum's votes to pass the crime bill. And the only reason they got those votes is because they put the Violence Against Women Act, which had enough votes to pass by itself. It didn't need to be put in the crime bill to pass. They put the Violence Against Women Act into the crime bill to get Bernie and Ron Dellums to vote for the crime bill.
Well, regardless, the bombing of Yugoslavia, the NATO action there, Bernie went along with it. So there was the famous historian Michael Parenti, who was a good friends with Bernie up until then. So there was some things he did to be conciliatory with the Democrats. By the way, the whole time you're talking about the violence against women and Biden, I'm thinking of Tara Reid because talk about hypocrisy, right? But Biden and the Clintons, their whole purpose was to drive the Democratic Party to the right. And, back when I was on good terms with MPP and Nick, we used to talk about the Whigs, right? I mean, the Whigs before the rise of Lincoln and the Republican Party, which started as a progressive anti-slavery party, had the rank and file being abolitionists or at least anti-slavery. But the elites continued to be pro-slavery. That's why they disintegrated and formed into the Republican Party. That was with Electoral College. I mean, it wasn't as appropriate as it is now. But again, I support the idea of a third party, maybe even a new third party if we can't coalition build enough. But yes, I mean, when you have situations where there's corrupt leadership and there's a structure where that leadership can't be replaced, there's no really alternative.
Well, Trotsky talked about the United Front a lot, and the United Front is what we need. We probably do need more third parties, because there are reasons that some of them haven't attracted people. But at the same time, we need a coalition. We need a united front running against capitalism. As long as we have a liberal democracy, we need an anti-capitalist faction, not just one party, but a united front against capitalism in that liberal democracy.
So are we like plutocracy with some remnants of democracy left? Because I see it's more of a plutocracy run by corporate elites at this point.
Well, Jimmy Carter agrees with you. And he's not a raving socialist. Jimmy Carter is actually the guy who started that Democratic Party slide to the right. Clinton gets a lot of blame, but Jimmy Carter is the one who appointed Paul Volcker to be Fed chair near the end.
He's redeemed himself since he's left the presidency. He doesn't go around getting millions for speeches. What he does is he goes and observes elections abroad.
There,
Venezuelan system, the most democratic system in the world, which I was able to witness as well. So I think he's redeemed himself since then. But you look at other former presidents like Bill Clinton.
There are
they just show up and give speeches for money. That's it.
There are exactly two people. 3 if you count Lincoln, but he got shot before anybody could really find out how much he had changed. But there are only 2 people in history who have become better people after being president. The first was Rutherford B. Hayes, who was the person who essentially caused the real fascist coup in America in 1877 when he agreed to pull troops out of the South and end Reconstruction in order to get the votes he needed in the House of Representatives.
Even Johnson in 65 was starting to do that as well. He was to the right of Lincoln.
But Johnson was still a horrible person in lots of other ways. So that was the first person. Rutherford B. Hayes, after his single term as president, spent the rest of his life trying to get black people to vote to make up for the way he screwed them over. It didn't work, sadly, but he realized he had done wrong and was trying to do something about it. And Jimmy Carter is the other one. Jimmy Carter is the only other person who's become a better person since leaving the Oval Office.
Yeah, I actually did a Habitat for Humanity build with him back in 1992, 91, 92. So I actually met him. He's really just sweet, down to earth guy. And he actually did the work. He wasn't just like there for
him. And I both have the same birthday, which is Chinese Independence Day, October 1st.
Nice.
And the most exciting things about the most exciting people who share my birthday are actors. It's sad. Gregory Peck and Spencer Tracy, though, so no slouches. More funny, though, Sterling K. Brown is exactly 1 year older than me. Same day, same month, but the year before.
Gregory Peck was in To Kill a Mockingbird, right?
Yes, Gregory Peck was in To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yep, dark hair. I know what you're talking about.
More importantly, and this is the best movie about rich people ever made. More importantly, Gregory Peck is in Man with a Million. Man with a Million is important because it tells the truth about how rich people are treated and how rich people live in a way no other movie does.
Oh, I think I saw that. Is that he's given like a bill for that he can't cash? He goes around and people treat him so well without spending money, right?
It was based on some British short story called The 1 Million Pound Note. And what's real there, the important thing about it for American movie history is that it featured the prototypes for Randolph and Mortimer Duke in Trading Places. Gregory Peck is given a £1 million note by 2 old rich British brothers who have a bet over whether or not he can follow the rules and not cash this £1 million note for a year. He's an American sailor who just got off the boat, and they hand him this £1 million note. You can't cash it for a year. At the end of a year, if you still have it, you can cash it. And so it's hilarious because you find out, number one, the rich never pay for anything because people never ask the rich for money. 2, the rich people make money by accident because people give them shares of investments for free in order to say these people are investing. And then when their investment actually pays off, even though they didn't put any money in, they still get money out of it. And thirdly, nobody asks anybody to pay back any loans if they think you're rich.
And so now with the tax breaks, right, it's even worse than it was back in Gregory Peck's
Once
time.
they start to think you might not be rich anymore, they start to ask you for money. And nothing illustrates this more than that movie. I don't think you could make that movie today because billionaires would not stand for the truth the way millionaires were willing to stand for the truth in the 1940s.
It's interesting when you really think about capitalism and money in this country, and you consider the disparity, when you don't have money, everyone wants to take your money. When you have money, people just leave you alone with your money.
Or give you more.
Right. It's absurd. You look at how bank fees are structured, right? Like, it's people with the least amount of money in their accounts that get hit with fees, right? It's the overdraft. If you don't have enough money, you get hit with a fee.
The poverty tax.
Money to cover things. It's this constant push to take the little bit away.
I'm working class. I've had to survive on overdraft fees, and how they get you also, if you desperately need the money, you need to take it out of the ATM where you go negative and there's a $3 fee or whatever. A lot of times you don't realize you're pending transactions. It doesn't matter if their transactions less than $1. So let's say that you have bought a piece of candy that you forgot about the day before. That's no $3 fee. And every single pending transaction, when it posts, it's another $3 fee from the money that you took out of the ATM. Right. It's added on what you owe in 2, 3, 4 weeks, whatever.
I think
it's ridiculous.
I think some banks give you like a $5 grace. I know
my bank gives me 20
TD Bank
months.
gives you a $5 grace. If you're overdrafted by less than $5, they won't charge you the overdraft fee.
But not all the banks do that. I've had banks that didn't do that.
My bank gives me.
But they kill you, right? Like, you take out $20, you got to pay the ATM $3 for taking out the $20. You got to pay your bank $2.50 for taking out the $20. And then next you know, you're overdrafted by $6 because you didn't pay attention to the fact that you were going to hit with all those additional fees. It is a constant push by every system to make sure that people who have the least spend the most to try and survive. And it's
why even being homeless is expensive. Living in your car is expensive.
That's why the price of gas just went up, because poor people have to drive the most to get to their 10 jobs.
Yeah, and even when you win, like my bank actually got sued in a class action lawsuit for their practices, because what they were doing, they would stack up your overdrafts. So if you had enough money to cover 2 things that you paid for, but not the third, they would they'd go through the third one first, the most expensive, and then they charge you.
You must have been with TD Bank before they got sued.
No,
I only use credit unions, by the way. Only use credit unions.
Yeah, well, when I have a chance, I'm going to try and switch.
So,
but
I encourage it. We did that during Occupy too. We had a whole campaign to divest from the big banks and invest in credit unions.
I'm so lucky. I'm so lucky with my bank, and it's such a stupid story, but I have to tell it because I can't ever give it up now because I'll never be able to get it back. But there used to be an investment firm called ING. And I never had a lot of money, but I played around a little bit on the stock market. And because I was buying some stocks online on their website, I was technically a client. And so I had a chance to sign up for their debit card, which was just a checking account that gave you interest like a savings account. And you got to use it as a debit card, and you didn't have any fees for your checking account. So it was great. And then Capital One bought out ING. Now, sadly, it doesn't pay interest anymore. I wish it did. But everything else stayed the same. And because I've never messed up that one bank account, despite having messed up all sorts of other bank accounts, because I never messed up that one bank account, I have a $20 overdraft protection, which is unheard of these days. They don't charge me any monthly fees for my checking account. They don't charge me out of network ATM fees. I only pay the ATM's fees.
What do you think, Chris, about the whole Robinhood investment thing?
So I'm going to get us on the subject of some of the problems that people got harassed for at MPP in a moment, and why that shouldn't be happening. But yeah, no, I think I don't know what I think sometimes.
What is that? I don't know what the
That
Robin.
was
Well, the
when
AMC,
Robinhood is
the AMC and the Robinhood thing, it was a way to get back at Wall Street for a while.
well, so Robinhood is an app. And Robinhood is pretty crooked. They made a big deal when they came into the field about how they were going to be a good and honest and little people's investment company. And what they really are is a platform where their app gives all sorts of information about what people are buying in real time to other investors, so that investment groups with whom Robinhood is supposedly competing on your behalf can actually have sort of insider knowledge based on how you as a Robinhood customer are trading.
Very interesting. Okay.
But Russia right now, Bitcoin, right? A lot of people that are involved with Bitcoin were involved with Robinhood. You know, Russia right now is trying to get their own Bitcoin. Venezuela had already done this as well as a way to fight the sanctions. Do you support the electronic currency or the Bitcoin at all, Chris?
So let's be honest. Let's be totally honest and talk about what this is. It's not currency. No electronic currency is a currency. It's not legal tender anywhere. What you've got is a commodity. It's like the tulip market. The tulips were used as money for a while in Amsterdam during the tulip boom. It was a big deal. People would use tulips as collateral for huge loans. Bitcoin is like tulips, not a new kind of money. When the bottom falls out, there are people who are going to be totally destroyed by it, like any other market crash.
And also a bunch of rainforests from all the carbon that the Bitcoin farms are putting
Yeah,
into.
because blockchain is apparently like the most number one. Blockchain isn't actually good for anything productive.
Not long term, yeah.
And number two, it's like the most energy wasteful thing computers can do, apparently.
So, anyways, the harassment you mentioned, Chris, I don't know much about it. Does that have to do with the whole woke thing, or?
Well, yes, in the sense that all woke really means in the modern sense. So let's start historically. Historically, woke was used by black communists to point out the fact that you could not have an anti-racist society in a capitalist society because the upper class was white. And as long as the upper class was all white, they would be racist against the black members of the proletariat. Because racism is a very simple and straightforward coding for class in American society.
All you have to do is look at Tulsa. Every time the African Americans did well economically, they were crushed by lynch mobs.
Well, you don't even have to go that far back in time. Right now in Tennessee, a majority black city with an all black city government of actually relatively working class people for city government too. It's not like these are the usual corporate people elected in the South, black or white. A city government that cleaned up the town in a lot of ways and made it a desirable location for a Ford plant is now watching as their town is dechartered so that their town as a city of black people cannot take the benefits of being cleaned up. And the responsibility is going to essentially be kicked up to the county, which of course is the people running the county are all the usual crooks, black or white.
And don't leave out that this sudden need to change over happened after
the Ford plant. Nobody was talking about taking their charter away before the Ford deal was good. Right. Renee is exactly right.
It's always the minute it appears that something is going to work to the benefit of a large population of black people.
And
all of a sudden,
I don't see a national hue and cry on this issue from the people who promised us we needed to elect them to save black people from Trump.
Oh, they're still not even getting DC, vote. DC still.
I want you to DM me after
budget.
the show, Chris, about what happened in Tennessee. I want to look into that case more. But just what I mentioned in the thread, and I'll mention it here. When I hear the word woke, I usually immediately in my mind I get the words identity politics. And trust me, it's not just the left. The right also use identity politics, although they'll negate it hypocritically.
Well, what the heck is white supremacy if not the worst form of identity politics out there?
Exactly. So, unfortunately, identity politics has been divisive within the left, right? When one section of the left is attacking the other. I'm not talking about liberals. I'm talking about the actual left.
Sure.
And so when people hear woke, whether they're on the right or they're leftists that have heard that word and associated with identity politics, they get different ideas in their head what that actually means. So maybe you could define for us what exactly you mean by woke, and then, of course, how it applies to what happened with MPP.
Racism is bad. Gay people and trans people deserve workplaces that are friendly to them. Disabled people deserve workplaces that are friendly to their needs or decent disability. Did I say racism is really bad? And the reason I mention these things is because there are a lot of people who, when they say woke in such a derisive way, they seem to be saying racism isn't that bad. They seem to be saying hating gay people isn't that bad.
It happened here in Florida recently. The critical race theory was reversed, as is done in other southern states. So that is related, right? Because at the same time that when the right uses the word woke and uses it to censor how we teach, right? They're complaining about censorship and people like Alex Jones is taken down, but here they are supporting censorship and how people are educated. So also, that is related, right?
But realistically, CRT is not being taught in any school that is not a graduate school anywhere in this country.
CRT.
So this argument,
not directly.
It's all like smoke and mirrors. There is no CRT being taught in elementary, middle. When
they say CRT, in history.
But teachers won't even talk about race or slavery now. They feel intimidated in the public schools.
CRT so that they can give something to fight about, so that people can cry and complain about being taught real history. This whole thing with woke, it's just another word that they decided to tack on so that they could pretend that, being a person who fights for solidarity and who fights against racism and who fights against sexism and who fights against homophobia and who fights against transphobia, like, oh, you're just woke. What? I don't even know what that means. Like, did I wake up this morning? Okay, yeah, I'm woke. Sure, I woke up this morning. Like,
that's exactly what it means. It means you see reality. I mean, again, this was black communists who were looking around and saying, this world ain't real. A lot of this shit.
There was, what was his name? James W. Ford, who was the first African-American to run as vice president of the United States under the communist ticket 3 times in the 1930s and 1940s. And you ask regular people, including African-Americans, even politically active African-Americans, hey, you heard of James W. Ford? And very few of them have, because there's been this covering up or sanitization of the radicalism of African-American activists. I've been studying this in my history classes here in Jacksonville at the grad level. But yeah, I mean, the covering up of it's like they're preventing African Americans from being radical again, right? It's like, the narrative on the Black Panthers. That's why I loved so much Judas and the Black Messiah. And, Fred Hampton Jr. was involved with that film. And I thought it was very accurate. And I hope more people see it, because that's one of the rare times that you can actually see what happened and how the radicalism was a good thing for the African American communities and the oppressed people. And then how the government clamped down on that, right?
And that's what they always do. This country is, it is always amazing to me how many people don't understand that the one thing that the U.S. is always good at is going to other places and fucking up their democracy under the guise of
the biggest preventer of democracy is the United States, right?
It's consistent.
Venezuela's democratic system, the U.S. is trying to impose a puppet on it, which of course is a rich white guy.
Right.
But that's what they always do when it conflicts with the imperial interests, right?
an international poll, and Americans are so pissed about it, especially the right wingers, but an international poll, America, more than number 2 Russia, more than number 3 China. America is the country other countries see as the biggest threat to democracy in the world.
And the U.S. was also called in a world opinion poll the biggest threat to peace in the world, followed by Pakistan because of the Indian vote, right? A huge population. But now here we have the U.S. actually, which was supposed to be the beacon of democracy in the world is saying that the U.S. is the number 1 threat to democracy. And that's despite the sellout governments in Europe against the will of their own people going along with sending weapons to neo-Nazis in Ukraine. It's just insanity.
It really is. And it's actually so bad it's ableist to call it insanity. Because no clinically, medically, genuinely insane people are actually this evil. This evil is only possible from sane people who are like, yeah, I know this is bad, but money, power, give it to me.
Yep, and that's also behind the whole, the anti-CRT votes. I mean, it's, they want to present a sanitized version of U.S. history, that only portrays us as the good guys. And, only the good parts of our history.
I said this on Twitter. I will say it on the air. They do not want schools to teach a version of history that suggests white supremacy is bad. They want schools to continue to uphold white supremacy in less subtle ways even than they do now.
And it's no coincidence that this whole push happened, after the uprisings of 2020.
Exactly.
This is, you had this huge awakening of, people, starting to finally maybe get a little bit of, the harm that was, it's being caused by police to Black people and people of color and Latino and indigenous people. And, even you got to the point where brands were starting to join in and declare Black Lives Matter, and Coca-Cola edition.
Scott, let me reference something. I'm glad you said Latino, because me as a Latino, the identity politics. This is how I've encountered identity politics, right? Including in academia. I've been told by white people that don't speak a word of Spanish, I can only refer to myself as Latinx. So when this first emerged, and by the way, they really don't know Spanish, because Spanish is not actually that sexist a language. There's a lot of gender neutral terms.
Well, so about the Latinx thing.
But can I just make this point real quick?
Sure.
Because it's related to woke, because a lot of people see woke as identity politics. It not necessarily is that. I'm not disagreeing, but so somebody like me, I'm told this, and I am very pro transgender. But it started out with them saying, well, the transgender community in the Latin community wants to be called Latinx. I said, absolutely. If that's what they want, go for it. But now they're saying we can't say Latina, we can't say Latino.
No
it's
one's
not politically correct.
That.
And they're trying to impose that on us, the bourgeois academics. And I find that that's wrong. And so when the identity politics is used in that way, I find it's divisive.
But yeah, I think that's one of those things, like, every Christmas, they'll put out a story about, they're not having gingerbread and men anymore. You have to call them gingerbread people. And that's not a real thing that's happening anywhere. That's, a right-wing, that's just a right-wing group putting out a fake story to rile people up. And
a lot of it's exaggerated, but what I just described is not embellished at all. That's happening. We're being told we can't say Latino anymore by people that are not part of our culture. And that, in a way, that is racist as well, that they're trying to impose that on us.
It's 100% racist. And, one of the other things is, I read, this whole Crown Act thing for like a split second. I was like, oh, yeah, Crown Act. And then my mother reminded me, and I posted it. My mother was like, you ever notice that we are always the ones that need like a law for people to treat us like human beings? Like, you need a law for me to be able to just wear my hair the way it grows off of my head. I need a law for you not to hang me from a tree. I need a law for you not to shoot me, because I'm driving my car. Like, how are these things necessary in this life?
Well,
and that's part of the problem. Like, if you teach real history, it actually makes it makes me human, right? It gives me humanity. It gives me the right to survive and to live and to breathe and to do the things that everybody else does. And it acknowledges that all the things in the history of this country removed my humanity, right? All of those things essentially taught other people that they don't have to treat me like a human being. And if you teach the real history and you acknowledge that that is what this history is about, is removing humanity from people that don't look like, that aren't white people, then now you've created a situation where people have to acknowledge that that's not right, right? I should be able to sleep. I should be able to eat candy and walk home. I should be able to jog. I should be able to do all these things that everybody else is able to do, simply because if you cut me open, I'm going to bleed like everybody else, right? Like, there shouldn't be this constant fight about it. And Chris, you and I talk about this all the time. Like, this idea that you can just ignore race in any multicultural kind of class struggle, to me, is absurd. Like, you can't just act like I'm not Black, because guess what? I'm Black to everybody else. Like, whether I want to be acknowledged that way or not. And I fully recognize and understand that race is a construct that was created in order to ensure that the class struggle continues. I know that. And I know it because that's factual. Like, there is no such thing as race. Like, melanin is not it could be, like, I've seen plenty of people who aren't Black, who are darker than me.
Simple. Homo sapiens originated from Southeast Africa.
Well,
that's just the fact.
Even beyond that, when you look at the facial reconstructions of all the famous oldest human specimen they're able to find in every different part of the world, they're all Black people. Cheddar Man, a Black person. The first person they ever found, the oldest human specimen they found in Canada, I can't remember the name, a Black person. The oldest specimen in northern Russia, where people are whiter than anybody but Scandinavians, a Black person.
Even in England, they found a specimen.
That's Cheddar Man,
a Black person. So even the ones that left Africa, and went to other regions of the world, their melatonin didn't change for a while.
People did not start to turn, white people did not start to turn white for multiple generations. We don't know quite how long yet because we haven't found the first white person. But
the white people are a minority of the world population. That's also important to understand. I don't like it when people of color are called minorities. I mean, soon they're going to be majority here, but worldwide, most people are Black, brown, or yellow.
White people weren't even white until for multiple generations in Europe, the home of white people.
Yeah, that's a construct. That's a construct,
exactly.
That erases, identity, European identities.
Everybody. Everybody.
I was at a protest, by the way, a few months ago in St. Augustine, and this counter protester woman came, and she said, "Look, you only have 2 African Americans with you." And we had more than that. And I said, "But I thought you people said you're colorblind." Right?
I just don't know. And I think this is part of my struggle with where MPP has gone. And it's so good. Like, Scott and I found such like a great sense of like, oh my God, we're actually in the same place, and when I first started speaking out, and there were, the few people who had also signed the petition who were speaking out, there were a lot of people who remained in MPP who were basically like, you guys are nuts. Like, you're all exaggerating. It's not that bad. We're going to fix it. We're going to be on it. We're going to take care of it. And almost all of those people have reached out to me now to say, like, you were right. I'm sorry. I should have listened.
That's true.
Paula was apologizing to people for bringing them on board.
And I spoke to Paula Jean, and she was like, "I love you. I've always loved you. I'm really sorry that I made you feel that way." And I appreciated that. And, it means something, because when I was speaking out last summer, it wasn't because I just wanted to like crap all over MPP. It was really because I didn't want this to happen again. Like, I had understood at that point that I was not part of the first group of people who had been purged. I was not part of the second group of people who had been purged. Like, it was a consistent cycle of them bringing new people in, figuring out ways to get rid of them when they started asking too many questions. And all I could see to myself was like, this is just going to happen again, because everyone who it happened to before decided to be silent and to just kind of walk away and not be bothered anymore. And I just don't have that in, like, I'm not that person who can avoid something bad happening and then watch the person behind me encounter that same obstacle and get hurt. Like, I don't have it in me to be that type of person.
Because you're an activist at heart, right? Us activists,
right.
we want to have empathy and
right.
prevent those type of things.
I couldn't do it. I could not sit back and like just let people think that it was me, that I was the problem, that we just couldn't handle it. And that's why we walked away. And that's why I always get so frustrated whenever I hear people, you know, still, like, even still, like, I guarantee you, Chris, tomorrow there'll be people who are like, there goes Renee again, you know, on her dem infiltrator kick because she just wants to destroy MPP. And people don't understand. Like, people are giving their last $5, $10, $15, $12 to this organization because they want to see change, because they want to see something happen, because they want to see, you know, it become this thing that it promises it's going to be, and then it doesn't happen. And me, as a Black person, as a Black woman who is a mother to a Black son, like, these are all intersectional things that that every single day are issues in my life. Every day I look at my son and I think about him as an adult, and I worry that he won't get there. Every single day, this is something that's on my mind. So I cannot, in good conscience, just sit back and allow an entire group of people to swindle the, you know, organizers, to swindle volunteers, to swindle people who are just giving money. Like, if you're not going to be about the thing that you promised, then I am for damn sure not going to sit back and allow you to be that thing and not be the person who speaks out about it.
Renee, I wanted to ask you, I've been in touch with the journalist Jordan Sheridan, and I believe he's done some good work finally on MPP and what Nick's been doing. What's your opinion of that, that he's getting involved in investigating this?
I actually was one of the people who he spoke to. He quoted me in the second article. You know, I'm happy that people are doing things. Last summer, I was on Hill Rising. I got a lot of grief for going on Hill Rising. How dare I talk to, you know, like, the audacity of me to get on TV and talk to Ryan Grimm. Like, I don't care. Like, I don't care who I talk to. I'm going to talk to anybody who is going to give me the space and the voice to be able to say out loud.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, it's Ryan Grimm. It's not like you went on TYT or something. You know,
Ryan
I
Grimm,
might as well have, with the way people carry on about it.
So Ryan Grimm and TYT are pretty much in the same place, but, you know, we need that too if we're ever going to get.
But has TYT talked about Julian Assange in a positive way like Ryan Grimm has? I think he's definitely a better journalist.
That's fair. I didn't know.
And I don't even, honestly, like, half of these shows that people complain about, I don't watch them. I don't want to watch them. I don't want to watch podcasters talk about other podcasters. I don't want to watch, like, people complaining about what people are doing on YouTube. To me, that's such a waste of time. I watch Kim Brown. She talks about real stuff.
I love Kim Brown. I had her on my last show a couple times. I love Kim Brown. I want to have her on this show. If I lived in a perfect world where I could do a show every night with anybody I could choose, I would choose Kim Brown, I think. Though that's really close because I really miss Kennedy already. But Kim Brown is pretty awesome. But that said, my issues with Ryan Grimm have nothing to do with his journalism, which is mostly really good. My issues with Ryan Grimm is how he acts on Twitter and how he's one of the usual suspects who is always trolling anything that is not approved under some auspices of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, that's an issue.
And his other issue is he's dry. Like, even me, somebody who I've talked to him and, like, DM'd with him a couple of times about random stuff, Like he said something one day and I was like, what are you talking about? And then it took me a while to realize that he was like being sarcastic, and I was like, oh my God, he's so dry sometimes.
I'm like that.
It like
So
went
I
right
can't-
over my head that he was being sarcastic. And so it happens to him, and then he ends up getting attacked because people don't realize like he's being sarcastic.
Also, when it's over text instead of verbal,
it's hard.
It's really hard to tell when somebody's being sarcastic. You don't have tonality.
Well, this is why I have a hashtag for when I'm being sarcastic.
There you go. Use that on Twitter to help.
It's hard enough to tell in person sometimes. You have to signal to people on Twitter. So I have my deadpan hashtag for when I'm being sarcastic.
Yeah, I got to start doing that because every now and again somebody's like, what? And I'm like, sarcasm, boo. Like, I'm being sarcastic.
No,
you don't want to say like all the people that associate with Jimmy Dore, don't talk to them kind of thing, right? I have my issues with Jimmy Dore, but I'm an admirer of Aaron Mate. You know, I think that Aaron Mate was treated terribly by TYT.
Yes, he was. I think that I don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about TYT.
Yeah, forget about them. We're talking about MPP. We already got enough negative stuff to say about
I will say that
people that remain there.
I will say that early on, when they were so bad and deliberately edgelording all the time, and as much as she tries to pretend to be a legitimate journalist now, Anna was as bad as Cenk. They were both edgelords. She can pretend all she wants. Anna was as bad as Cenk when they were edgelords, and she gets away with a lot that he gets blamed for. And
also, she's Armenian, and she's on a show called The Young Turks, and that's the name of the group that committed the Armenian genocide. So that doesn't really make sense to me.
So this is where it gets really, really, really complicated, because the Young Turks were broadly one group, and in actuality, like three different groups. There were three phases of the Young Turks. The original Young Turks were extremely liberal and wanted to give every part of the Ottoman Empire more autonomy or even independence. And then there was the middle phase of the Young Turks that still had a lot of liberalism for Turks, but was starting to be more nationalist and exclusionist against everyone.
Chris, sorry, I'm going to be right back. I'm going to grab my Jamaican ginger beer. I got to clear my throat up.
And then the last stage of the Young Turks was World War I, which of course they got really reactionary fast, and that's when the genocides happened too.
Right. And I'll just, and I'm sorry to say I can't stay on much longer.
I need to wrap us up soon.
I gotta get up in the morning. But and I know, Scott, you probably have a lot to say about this too, but the whole Jimmy Dore thing turned into a real beef within MPP when they first decided to sign on for Force the Vote, which I will note as just a side note, they were not in charge of, they did not decide to do on their own. One of the big problems in the Slack at the time was like, are we really just going to jump on board with this thing in Jimmy Dore without having a conversation about whether or not the volunteers are really in sync with the things that he's talking about? And I don't,
I remember that. Yep.
I have my own separate issues regarding Jimmy Dore, mostly because sometimes he says things that I just feel like are totally outrageous, and not because I don't think he's saying them because he's really trying to rile up the working people towards a real movement. I think he says the things that are controversial enough to get him more likes, get him more subs.
Jimmy Dore,
I feel like that's what his concern is.
Jimmy Dore Jimmy Dore is not the only one, and I'm not going to single him out. I'm going to just talk about.
But he was a big fight within MPP.
Of course. Oh, I bet.
Scott stayed longer than I did in that fight.
So that is related, right? Because Nick stayed with the Dore worshippers, right? That was kind of his thing, right?
Well,
it's kind of related. Can I say how it's sort of related because it impacts the kind of people who were signing up to volunteer, and the kind of people who were staying. So if you have this Jimmy Dore contrarian style of volunteer, then we're always arguing because we have all these contrarians coming in, and they don't. They were anti-establishment, but not with any of their own
theory, no real leftism.
Exactly.
So if your two most outspoken and noticeable advocates for a period of time are Jimmy Dore and Nico House, that's going to affect who comes in the door to volunteer for your organization.
I know Nico House personally, by the way. We were both living in South Florida at the same time, but he's kind of gone off the deep end too with the whole vaccination thing.
So
right. And somebody just mentioned in the chat, like, I hope he has Paula Jean back on to have a real that's never going to happen. Now that Paula Jean has stepped out of and had the audacity and nerve to say that MPP is a fraud and she's not going to support them, Jimmy Dore will never have her back on. He's never going to address the issues within MPP. He's always going to put it off on bad faith actors and people who aren't serious and people who weren't willing to do the work to fix the organization. I've heard that over and over again, over and over again ad nauseum, and it's all horseshit because he is a donor, his wife is a donor, they're friends of Nick. I don't know how much money they've given. There's plenty of rumors that I've heard on the back end, but I also know that they intentionally worked against a young Black woman who had a job opportunity. They intentionally got her fired because she was speaking out against MPP. Yes, they did. It was a big chaos and it was unfair to her. And
Renee, please DM me information on that after the show because I want to get
I'm interested
more information on that. Definitely.
Yeah.
Certainly will. And it just, to me, one of my big issues with Dore, like in general, is because I am such a firm believer in multicultural coalition being about solidarity, not being about unity, not being about walking together, but actually being about me caring about the shit that affects you and you caring about the shit that affects me and caring about it enough that I am willing to set my own shit aside to make sure that we all get the same things that we need in order to be humans and to live.
Renee, tell me if you agree with this. Unity is sympathy. Solidarity is empathy. So solidarity goes deeper, right?
Well,
absolutely.
Unity is me standing up on a hill ranting at people like Mussolini or Hitler and saying, we're stronger together. We have to obey the state. And solidarity is a bunch of people, is everybody else standing together and linking arms and throwing rocks.
Right. And there has to be a point where people understand, like, I can't fight alongside of somebody who, once we win the fight, is going to turn around and tell me I shouldn't get everything that we just fought for. And that's a major thing that's missing with this battle. So when I hear, Dore and Hinkle, whatever his name is,
Jackson,
and all these people talking about, we're going to do the red-brown coalition and all these things. And they don't understand, like, you're trying to get me to work with someone who is actively working against me having my humanity. And therefore, I am not going to do that. I don't care what anybody says. And
Renee, I know you want to go soon. So I wanted to ask you something before you go.
Yeah.
We usually do 2-hour shows, but I know you have to go soon. So Chris and I are big history buffs. Are you familiar with the history of the Black Seminoles?
Yes.
That's great because a lot of people are not. I mean, Harriet Tubman came to Jacksonville as part of the southern route of the Underground Railroad to deliver runaway slaves to the Seminoles that protected them and defeated the U.S. Army in 3 different wars. Mm-hmm. And you've never seen a Hollywood movie that showed that unity.
No, and there's also
but that shows, not just unity, right? Solidarity.
Who are still fighting for their rights to be considered part of the tribes. There's so many battles that are happening because everybody is trying to hold on to their part of what they earned without understanding that we are all in the same fight, right? Like I bought a book recently about a young Indian man Native American who was lynched. And I've never heard that story until I saw the book and just happened to pick it up in a used bookstore. Like these stories,
even Southern Italians were lynched. They weren't considered, even Southern Italians were lynched at one point in the United States. They were not considered white.
Paco and Vanzetti were essentially killed for being Italian and anarchists more than for actually being guilty of anything.
Right. And when people look at the historical context of how race became such a major thing, and they don't understand, like, when you talk about the Bacon Rebellion, like, people talk about it and they don't understand that the only reason the blacks became the slaves was because the Europeans realized that if they elevated the whites, they would take that elevation. So I tell people all the time, don't come to me and argue with me because I'm speaking out against racism. Like, I'm not the fool who believed that race actually existed. Those are your people. Your people believe that shit. Like, it wasn't me. Like, I didn't decide to oppress myself. So don't come at me now and tell me, like, oh, just ignore race and, oh, put race aside, and you talk too much about race and you can't put race first. I don't put race first, but I don't put race last either. They're intertwined. You cannot remove one from the other.
A lot of it's white guilt, right?
Conversation I can't talk to.
It's white guilt. They don't want to talk about it. It's from
let's
talk about it, you know.
So white guilt. So let's talk about white guilt. I was going to close with Bacon's Rebellion, but let's go with white guilt instead. So I think that there is something. I think it's important to understand what white people have done. I think it's a lot more productive for white people to feel angry at older or wealthier white people than it is for them to feel guilty about being white. Nobody chose to be born the way they chose to be. That's part of what we're fighting against when we say rich people shouldn't be born rich. But all of that aside, I mean, yes, white people have advantages in our society. I mean, I am not, as a white man, necessarily smarter than a lot of black women on Twitter who have fewer followers than me. But I am a white man, which means there are people who listen to me who won't listen to someone else, which is one of the reasons I try to talk about race so much.
And that's why you can't separate it from policy. That's the, coming back to MPP, well, the current kick that they're on is this like populism without identity politics. That's, what Nick is trying to spin it as, and let's just be clear. All of that is horseshit. All of that is just, it was cover for the investigation. But
I mean, the right say they're populist too, but they're only populist in words. And you have fake leftists that aren't real leftists that they're the same way.
So, like, how do you fight for Medicare for all, but not, it's like they're boiling it down to this like default politics.
Well, so here's
which is just for cishet white men. Basically. And
so
everything else is identity.
So here's what woke means now.
Yeah.
And I will always think of Bill Maher or Matt Taibbi or even Glenn Greenwald, even though he's definitely not het. There is a certain kind of privileged white man who always says woke with a sneer. And those people are not your friends. I don't care if they like black women like Bill Maher allegedly does. I don't care if they have a black friend or voted for Barack Obama or whatever excuses they make. Those privileged white guys who sneer when they say woke. Jackson Hinkle is one of these people. Those privileged white guys who sneer when they say woke are not your friends. They are not proletarians. They are people who benefit from the system and are more comfortable around people who think and act like them, and who cannot handle being challenged by women or black people or God forbid, Black women.
Yep. And I do have to jump, but I will just
Yes.
say, like, my last note is the people who argue the most about race not mattering are the people who are least affected by racism. So it's always easy when you are not the Black person to say racism is not a big deal, because you're not afraid when you see the lights in your rear view.
Exactly.
You're not afraid when you see the person with the Confederate flag. You're not afraid when you see these things coming at you that you know literally could cost you your life because of the way you look. So I'm gonna have to drop, and I'm sorry.
And this is where I actually want to close the show out anyway. That's a great place for us to end this. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. It was so nice
to meet everybody.
It's really good to talk to you. Yes.
Great making acquaintance with you both. Definitely keep in touch.
Will do. And I'll send you that note, Alex. Okay. I'll send it in the morning. All right.
Really good to talk face to face, Renee.
You too, Chris.
Bye.
Yeah, same here.
And folks,
it's the Three Musketeers. Hey, Chris, you need to get a hat on. Him and I got our hats on. You don't.
Yeah, sorry about that, but I got a bad case of pandemic hair. So
I would find my red beret, but
I got to get a wig when we bring Lee Camp on, right? Because if you two gonna have long hair, I mean, I got to have long hair too.
If you can get Lee Camp to come on, you can definitely co-host that episode. Absolutely.
I'll email him.
On that note, everybody, have a great night. I want to thank Renee again, even though she's already left us. I want to thank Renee for making it. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you. It was good to be here.
Don't have a guest yet for next week, but I will be looking for one. Everybody have a great night, and we'll tweet at you.